Hi guys, it's Angie with Fun Endeavors Tie-Dye Lab. Today I'm going to show you how I mix up soda ash solution and liquid dye. I get asked all the time, what kind of dyes do I use and what is soda ash? So I thought I would go ahead and show you a few of the things that I use to mix them up and show you how I mix them. The first thing that I use is disposable gloves. I'm very sensitive to soda ash and most other chemicals, so whenever I'm working with them, I use my disposable gloves. I also wear gloves when I tie up my shirts that have been soaked in soda ash. Then of course I usually wear my gloves whenever I apply the dye. One of the most important components of tie-dye is soda ash. Soda ash is sodium carbonate. And what it does is it increases the pH of the reaction so that the Procion fiber reactive dyes will bond properly with the shirt. I purchased my soda ash from Dharma Trading Company, then I put it down inside of these containers that I purchased from the dollar store just to make it more convenient. You can purchase sodium carbonate several different places though. Arm & Hammer's Super Washing Soda is sodium carbonate, and most pool supply stores carry sodium carbonate as well. The next item that I use is urea. I purchased this one from Dharma Trading Company too, and put it down inside the smaller container. I live in a hot, humid climate, and so I use the urea in all of my liquid dyes. This helps to keep my shirt from drying out before the dyes had plenty of time to react with the fabric. I also use an immersion blender when blending part of my dyes, and it's very useful when making thickened dye using sodium alginate. A good respirator is a must. I wear mine when I mix up soda ash, dye, when I use RIT color remover, or bleach. You gotta protect those lungs. Now for the dye bottles. The ones that I use the most are 16 ounce, 8 ounce, 4 ounce, and 1 ounce. The 16 and 8 ounce I purchased at Dharma Trading Company, and the 4 ounce and 1 ounce are both needle tip bottles that I purchased at Amazon. I use masking tape and write the color on the masking tape, then just stick it onto the side of the bottle. Then after I'm finished and rinse out my bottles, if I'm going to put a different color in there, I can just peel the tape off and replace the tape. I also have two different sizes of funnels that I use. I use the larger one for my 16 and 8 ounce containers and the little one for my needle tip bottles. Then I have several measuring cups that I use. I use a 1 cup, half cup, and sometimes a 1/4 cup. And I use a couple measuring spoons. I use a teaspoon and a tablespoon. Last but not least are my dyes. I purchased from 4 main suppliers: Dharma Trading Company, Custom Colors, Grateful Dyes, and Prochemical and Dye. I like to write the color names on top of my jar lids. That way I can very easily see what the color is without having to pick the jar up. I also sometimes write the amount of dye that I use in 1 cup of water on top of the jar if it's a color I'm not familiar with. Each dye supplier has their own set of instructions for how to mix up their dyes. It's always best to consult with whoever you purchased your dyes from to see how to mix them up properly. For the most part, the 4 suppliers that I purchased from have the same set of instructions. The quantity of dye used is about the only thing that changes. Dharma uses an asterisk system to tell how much dye to mix in 1 cup of water. If a dye color has no asterisk behind the name, you use 2 teaspoons of dye to 1 cup of water. If the color name has 1 asterisk behind it, you add 4 teaspoons of dye to 1 cup of water. A color that has 2 asterisks behind it uses 8 teaspoons of dye to 1 cup of water. Okay, so let's go ahead and mix up our soda ash. I have a 5-gallon bucket that I put down inside of a work sink. And to mix up a soda ash solution, it is 1 cup of dry soda ash to 1 gallon of water. So this time I want to mix up 1.5 gallons of soda ash solution. So I'm going to use 1.5 cups of my powdered soda ash. By the way, I'm wearing my respirator while I'm doing this. I've used a Sharpie and marked the side of my bucket, so I have measurements on the side of my bucket for 1 gallon, 1.5 gallons, and 2 gallons. I'm just going to turn on my tap water and warm it up a little bit before I start adding it to my bucket. As you can see, the minute I start adding the water to the soda ash, I start stirring it. This will help it dissolve quicker and make it dissolve more thoroughly. If I add my water and just leave my soda ash without stirring it, what can happen is it can clump, and it gets a little bit difficult to break up those clumps. Sometimes if that happens, you can take your hands down in and just kind of work with those clumps until you break them up. Don't leave them though, because if you do, they won't just dissolve. They get kind of like rocks down in the bottom of the bucket. After I feel like most of my soda ash is dissolved, I go ahead and add the rest of the water. I'm using the measurements on the side of my bucket to know how much to add. I'm going to give another quick stir, and then I'm going to add my shirts. I can get quite a few shirts inside of 1.5 gallons of soda ash solution. I just want to make sure they get well submerged. Then I'm going to put the lid on and let them soak for at least 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, so let's start mixing our liquid dye. As I mentioned earlier, I always use urea in my liquid dye. I use 1 tablespoon for every cup of water that I use. So my larger containers are 16 ounces or 2 cups. So I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of urea to these bottles. Then the smaller bottles are 8 ounces or 1 cup, so I'm just going to add 1 tablespoon. I used to mix up urea water, where I would just take my water and add the proportionate amount of urea to it, dissolve my urea, and then use that when I mixed up my dye. But I actually found that it was easier just to add it to the bottles. Before I start adding my dye, I'm going to make sure I put my gloves and my respirator on. I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite methods to mix dye. There are lots of different ways you can mix dye. Feel free to use whatever way you prefer. The first way is mixing the dye down inside of the dye bottle. I have my larger funnel inside of one of the 8-ounce containers. The color that I'm going to use is Wholesale Pink from Custom Colors. I'm putting 2 teaspoons of dye down into the bottle using the funnel. Then I'm going to add half a cup of distilled water. I have hard water, and that can interfere with the vibrancy of the colors with some of the dyes. So that's why I go ahead and use the distilled water. You can use tap water if you don't have hard water, or you can actually add water softeners. I've never done that myself, it's just easier for me to use distilled. Then I'm going to put the lid on my bottle and give it a good shake. This will dissolve the urea and the dye down into the water. Then I'm going to go ahead and put my funnel back in my bottle and add the other half of a cup of water. Give it another good shake. And this one's done. The second method I'm going to show you is the one using my immersion blender. I'm going to make 2 cups of dye, so I'm taking one of my 16-ounce containers and I'm going to pour the urea from that container into my mixing cup. Then I'm going to use fuchsia from Grateful Dyes, and I need 4 teaspoons of dye for this one. So I'm using 1 tablespoon, which is the equivalent of 3 teaspoons, and adding 1 additional teaspoon of dye. Then I'm going to add 2 cups of distilled water. Like I said, not every color requires the same exact amount of dye, so you need to check with your supplier to see exactly how much dye to add. Now I'm blending it with my mixer. Fuchsia sometimes is one of those colors that's a little bit difficult to get mixed if you don't use a blender of some sort. It's one that's pretty bad to speckle. After it's well blended, I use my funnel and pour it down into my dye bottle. The last color that I'm going to mix is Kelly Green from Dharma Trading Company. This color is a 1 asterisk color, which means that I have to add twice the amount of dye. I'm going to mix up 1 cup of dye, so I'm going to put my funnel down inside of my dye bottle and add 4 teaspoons of dye. This time I'm going to go ahead and add the entire 1 cup of distilled water to my bottle instead of doing half, mixing it, and then adding the other half. As you begin mixing up quite a few dyes, you're going to develop a method of your own that works the best for you. Then I'm going to add the lid and give it a good shake until it's well dissolved. Okay, so now that you know how to mix up your soda ash solution and your dye, it's time to start tie-dyeing. If you guys have enjoyed watching this video, I sure would appreciate it if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. All you have to do is hit the big red subscribe button. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.